All right, this is the review for quiz 3, sum and difference in a half angle. So if you look at problem 1 here, it says that sine A is 4/5 and A is in the second quadrant because it's between 90 and 180, or pi over 2 and pi. So the first thing you have to do is draw this triangle. So starting from the origin, you're going to draw a radius from the origin to the edge of the triangle, and then A is the angle, the opposite is 4, and the hypotenuse is 5 by the sine ratio. And then you have to find out what this side is. So use Pythagoras to find that side, and you find out that x is equal to 3, but since you're in the second quadrant here, x is actually -3 in the second quadrant. All right, and then the second drawing, cosine B is 12/13, and you're in the first quadrant between 0 and 90. So you draw the reference triangle here. Here's angle B. The adjacent is 12 and the hypotenuse is 13. You use Pythagoras to find this side, and when you use Pythagoras to find this side, the side is 5. And then sine of A minus B, you're just going to look at your identity sheet and see that sine of A minus B is equal to sine of A cosine of B minus cosine A sine of B. And then you pick off the sine of A. So here's A, the opposite is 4, and the hypotenuse is 5. It's 4/5, and that's given up here. And the cosine is also given, but it's the adjacent over the hypotenuse, 12/13. And then subtracting the cosine of A is the adjacent, -3 over 5. And the sine of B is the opposite, is 5. And the hypotenuse is 13. So when you're calculating these problems here, I'd like you to leave this in fraction form. So 4 times 12 is 48, and then 5 times 13 is 65. So you get 48 over 65. And then -3 times 5 is -15 over 65, but you're subtracting -15 over 65, so that becomes adding 15 over 65 when you add these two together. Now that you have a common denominator, 48 plus 15 is 63 over 65. Number 4, cosine of 2b, looking at the identity sheet, is cosine squared minus sine squared. So cosine of b is 12/13 squared, and then sine of b is 5/13, so squared. You get 144 over 169 minus 25 over 169, which is 119 over 169. Number 5, sine of 2a is sine 2a. Let me say that again. Sine 2a is equal to 2 sine a cosine a. Sine of a is 4/5, and then cosine of a is -3/5. Multiply these all together, you get -24 over 25. And then cosine b over 2, looking at your identity sheet, is 1 plus cosine b divided by 2, the square root of all that. So 1, and then the cosine of b is 12/13, so you have 1 plus 12/13 in the numerator, and this fraction bar didn't show up very well, so let me draw it in there. So 1 plus 12/13 is 25 over 13 divided by 2, and 25 over 13 divided by 2 is 25 over 26. But you know what the square root of 25 is, it's 5. So you get 5 over the square root of 26. And then the next page, use sum or difference. So cosine of 75 is cosine 45 plus 30, using your identity sheet. That's cosine 45 cosine 30, so this is a sum identity. minus sine 45 cosine sine 30. Then you have to look at your unit circle. The cosine of 45 is square root 2 over 2, and cosine 30 is square root of 3 over 2, and then subtract sine of 45 square root of 2 over 2, and then sine of 30 is 1 over 2. Multiplying these two together, you get square root of 6 over 4, and then multiplying these two together, you get square root of 2 over 4. So square root of 6 over 4 minus square root of 2 over 4 is the square root of 6 minus the square root of 2 over 4. And then number 8, use the sum or difference to find the tangent of 165. So 165 is 120 plus 45. So the angles you're trying to find here for the sum or difference are the ones that are on the unit circle, the special reference angles that you want to use from the unit circle. So 120 plus 45. So tangent 120 plus tangent 45 over 1 minus tangent 120 times tangent 45. That's just the identity off the sheet, off the identity sheet. And then look at your unit circle. Tangent of 120 is square root of 3, and tangent 45 is 1. And then 1 minus square root of 3 times 1. So you end up with square root of 3 plus 1 over 1 minus the square root of 3. So there's ways to simplify this, but we're just going to leave the answer like that. So you don't have to simplify this any further. So verify this identity. So just looking at the sum identity for cosine, you have cosine x cosine pi over 2 minus sine x sine pi over 2, and we're wondering if that equals negative sine x. Well, cosine x we leave alone, and then cosine of pi over 2 is just 0, and then minus sine x, and then sine of pi over 2 is 1. So this times 0 becomes 0, and then 1 times negative sine x is negative sine x, so you do have the left side equals the right now. Condensing means that you're looking at sum identity for sine, so you're just going to add the two together as sine of 115. And then you look the sum identity for cosine, means you have to subtract these two, and you get cosine of 65. And then this is a second review similar to the first one here. The first one I just went over, but if you have the cosine of angle A is 4/5, but you're in the third quadrant, so it's between 270 and 360. You're going to draw a reference triangle down here. The adjacent is 5, and the hypotenuse, let me say that again. The adjacent is 4, the hypotenuse is 5. Here's angle A. You have to find out what this is. This is going to be negative 3 after I use Pythagoras, because it's in the fourth quadrant here, and the x values are negative there. So let me move this out of the way a little bit so you can see that I did write negative 3 right here for this side. All right, and then the second reference triangle, sine of B is 5/13, and you're in the first quadrant. So here's angle B, the opposite is 5, the hypotenuse is 13. You have to calculate what this is by Pythagoras. When you use Pythagoras, you find out this is 12. So down to number 3, the cosine of A minus B from the identity sheet is cosine A cosine B minus sine A sine B, and then just plugging in for each of these. Cosine of A is 4/5. Cosine of B, that's 12/13. Minus sine of A would be negative 3/5, and then sine of B is 5/13. Multiplying these together, 48 over 65, and then minus a negative 15 over 65 becomes plus 15 over 65. You get 63 over 65. And then sine of 2b from the identity sheet is 2 sine b cosine b. So now you're looking at angle B here too. The sine of B is 5/13, and the cosine of B is 12/13. Multiplying those together, you get 120 over 169. And then cosine of 2a, you can use, there's one of three identities from the sheet you could use. I just find it easier to just look at, memorize one of them, or know that cosine 2a is cosine squared a minus sine squared a, so I don't have to know what the other two are. That I could substitute for one of these and find a different identity. Anyway, so looking at cosine of a is 4/5 and square it, and then sine of a is negative 3/5 and square it. So you get 16/25 minus 9/25, which is 7/25. And then cosine a over 2 is 1 plus cosine a divided by 2, the square root of all that. And then you look at cosine of a is 4/5. So 1 plus 4/5 over 2 is 1 plus 4/5 is 9/5 over 2. And then 9/5 over 2 is 9/10. And then just take the square root of 9, which is 3. And you have 3 over the square root of 10. And on the back side, the sum formula for tangent, 105, you want to find angles that are on the unit circle sheet there. So 60 plus 45. And then using the identity would be tan 60 plus tan 45 minus over 1 minus tan 60 tan 45. That's actually number 8 here. So I didn't have enough room for everything, so I'd put number 8 here. So then tangent of 60 is square root of 3 plus 1, and then 1 minus square root of 3 times 1. You end up with square root of 3 plus 1 over 1 minus the square root of 3. Once again, let me make a better fraction bar here. And then, so number 7 is over here to the right. Sine of 15 is sine of 45 minus 30, and then you use the difference identity for sine. Sine of 45 cosine 30 minus cosine 45 sine 30, and then the sine of 45 is root 2 over 2 cosine 30 square root of 3 over 2 minus cosine 45 root 2 over 2 sine of 30 is 1/2. Multiplying these together, get square root of 6 over 4 minus square root of 2 over 4. Since this is the same denominator, then I'm just going to write it this way: square root of 6 minus square root of 2 over 4. And then number 9 off to the right again here. So use the half angle formula. Cosine of 75 is the same as cosine of 150 over 2. And then use the half angle formula for cosine. Square root of 1 plus cosine 150 over 2. And then you want to find the cosine of 150 on the unit for circle, which is negative root 3 over 2. So 1 minus root 3 over 2. All right, so that's just 2 minus root 3 over 2. So when you put this in the denominator, 2 times 2 is 4. So you have 2 minus root 3 over 4, and then take the square root of 4. So you have root 2 minus root 3 over the square root of 4, which is 2. And then verify the identity here. So we're trying to see if this left side, so working on this left side, is equal to right. And the sum identity for cosine, cosine pi, cosine x minus sine pi, sine x. Well, the cosine of 180 is negative 1, and the sine of 180 is 0. So you have negative 1 times cosine x, which is negative cosine x, and this is just a 0. That does equal the right side, negative cosine x. So for the difference identity for cosine, means you're going to add these two together. So 370 plus 105 is 475. You could simplify. It's 475. You can just leave it like that. So in order to simplify it, you'd have to subtract 360 from there. And you'd end up with 115, cosine of 115 if you did that. And then finally, the sine identity, the difference. So just take the difference between the two angles there. 80 minus 15 is 65. So that's review 3. And if you have to take retake quiz 3, then you want to look at this before the retake.